Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in October. So overall, October was a pretty average reading month. I started and completed 6 books, which added up to a grand total of 1,966 pages. As far as the star ratings went, I gave 3 3-stars, 1 3.5-star, and 2 4-stars. So pretty good reading month, I'd say. I didn't find any new favorites, but I had a good enough time reading, and it was a worthwhile month for me. So as usual, I think that I will start with the book that I liked the least and work my way up to the book that I liked the most so we can end on a high note. So let's jump right in and talk about everything I read in October. So first up, we have Qualityland by Mark Uwe Kling, I believe is how it is pronounced. I had a friend correct me on it. This is a dystopian soft sci-fi novel, and it follows a man who he lives in a society that has, much like a lot of dystopian sci-fis, a world where everything has been taken over by computers and technology. This is actually kind of a satirical novel, so it's pretty fun, pretty funny. It's thinly veiling this sort of dark underbelly. And it touches on a lot of different themes like corruption in politics and bureaucracy, and, you know, ultimately the way that technology has the potential to sort of destroy our way of life if it is given too much power over us. I don't want to go into too great of depth with this story for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a fairly complex story, but also I'm already forgetting what it's about. This was fun while I was reading it, but it was just one of those books that I ultimately, as soon as I closed it, it just started disappearing out of my mind. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Of course, the neighbors need to use their machinery while I'm filming. Okay, thank you. So it was still, 3 stars, that's not a bad rating. That's pretty middle of the road. I enjoyed it while I was reading it. It's not a new favorite. I'm not going to remember it, but I had a good time while I was reading it. So, I don't know. I would recommend this book if any of that sounds good to you. If you like dystopian stories and you like kind of satirical dystopian stories about technology specifically, like how technology can kind of destroy our way of life, this may be a great choice for you. Next up, we have Survivor by Chuck Palahniuk. This is a really interesting the way this book is told. It actually, the pages, rather than going from 1 up to whatever, it's counting backwards. So the first page in here, I believe, is 289, and it starts as chapter 47, which is a really interesting, I think a really interesting, unusual way to write a book. Anyhow, so it's following this character, Tinder Branson, and he is, when the book opens, he is on an airplane he's the only person on the airplane. He has sort of taken control of the plane, gotten everyone off, and the plane is soon to crash. And in the meantime, he is telling his life story, so it'll be recorded on the black box in the plane. And he's telling the story of how he's ultimately the last surviving member of a death cult. And so he's explaining in his life story kind of where he came from and how he got to where he is in these final moments. And it's just such a wild story. Really weird and out there, but also really interesting. This is definitely unlike anything I've ever read before in both the concept and in the sort of the way the story is crafted. This is the second book that I've ever read by Chuck Palahniuk. The first is Fight Club, and I have to say, though I did enjoy this quite a bit more than Fight Club just kind of didn't work for me, despite the fact that I love the movie. The book, not so much. I like this a whole lot more than Fight Club. Although I'm pretty sure that Chuck Palahniuk might be kind of a one-trick pony. This main character, Tinder Branson, could have been swapped out, just straight on swapped out with a protagonist from Fight Club. Not that I don't like that character well enough, I do, but I don't know, it didn't really impress me. Still though, like I said, this was an unusual book, interesting to read, not my favorite, but I don't know, I would still probably recommend this. Yeah, so 3 stars for Survivor. Next up, we have The Night Shift by Natalka Burian. This book is pretty much a portal fantasy, an urban fantasy, about a woman who works two jobs, two night jobs. She has one job as a bartender and then a second job working in a bakery. And so she has a very unforgiving schedule, you know, working through the night every night. And a friend of hers that she works with at the bar tells her about these portals, basically, that you can go in one and come out somewhere else in the city in the other end, and kind of tells her about this so she will have an easier time getting from her first job to her second job. Very shortly after he has told her about these portals, he vanishes. And the story kind of goes from there. This book, I really enjoyed this book. This is really my kind of concept for a book. I mean, urban fantasy is just one of my favorite subgenres of all time, and portal fantasies, absolutely love them. I also really just like the very straightforward writing style. It's not particularly challenging, but sometimes you just want to not have to work so hard for a book. You just want to sit down and have a fun experience reading a book. So I really appreciated that about this book. I ended up giving The Night Shift 3.5 stars. Honestly, what kept this book from getting a higher rating was really the ending. The way it built up towards the climax of the novel, it had great pacing and the great structure, and I was just so invested. But the climax, whenever it happened and this sort of resolution was in sight, it really kind of dropped the ball. It ended too quickly, wrapped it up too neatly. I don't feel like the ending really did the rest of the book justice. Still worth the read though. If you're into portal fantasies and urban fantasy and that kind of stuff, and that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it. But just know it's not the greatest ending out there. So take that as you will. Next up the list is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is an OG sci-fi novel, and it's pretty crazy that I am only reading it now. This book did a whole lot for the genre of sci-fi. This is the story of a group of people who have been selected to go on a pilgrimage on the planet Hyperion, a planet that is seemingly on the brink of collapse, a planet that also has a life form on it called the Shrike that seem to be very mysterious and very powerful, though the book doesn't go into great depth about them. There is the overarching story of these people going to this planet and, you know, traveling out to the time tombs on Hyperion. However, 90% of the book is spent on the individual stories of each character, which I think it's a group of about 6 or 7 people. And this book really feels much more like a short story collection. Interestingly enough, though this book looks like it was written, you know, maybe late 60s, early 70s, this book was written in 1989, which I think is really cool. Not only the fact that it kind of looks old, but also that it has sort of this old school style of writing, which I really appreciated. Aside from the Canterbury Tales, I've never read anything else that is written like this, so that was very enjoyable. That being said, it would be difficult to rate this as anything other than like a short story collection, because that's really the structure of this book. I was personally more interested in like the overarching story, which played a very small part of the book, so that was a little disappointing. A couple of the stories, the individual character stories, I really liked and got into. Most of them though, I don't know, they just didn't really hook me. But going back to the fact that it is such an unusually structured story, just very well crafted, very smart. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. This is a must read if you were really into like OG sci-fi novels. This is really a must read for you. Yeah, so overall 3.5 stars for Hyperion. Next up is The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This was a pick for my friend Leslie over at the Nerdy Narrative, her Wine and Crime book club. This was the October pick, so I joined in and read this as well. This book is a sci-fi novel, and it is about a woman named Evelyn who is she's a scientist, a genetic scientist. She actually, basically just her job, she creates clones, and she researches clones and creates clones. This is not a very long book, so I don't want to go into great depth about it. I don't want to spoil anything because it is such a quick read. What can I say to not spoil this? A woman named Martine tracks Evelyn down to have a discussion with her. We find out that Martine is actually a clone. She was cloned without her knowledge. Martine comes to Evelyn for some help, and it's a very tense and awkward situation. I just kind of want to leave it at that. I think that this, though I don't think this is meant to have just like gigantic plot twists or anything. A lot of enjoyment for you, if you decide to read it, will come out of not knowing too much about what's going on. So I'm just gonna zip it right there. This book, I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 stars. This is the first book that I've ever read by Sarah Gailey, and I have to say I really like her writing style, and am definitely going to read another book by her. In fact, I recently bought the pink one. What is it? I think it's called Just Like Home, and I'm really looking forward to getting to that one. Unfortunately, I was out of town and unable to join in on the live discussion that Leslie had on her channel, but from what I understand, it seems like most people, it was kind of a mixed bag, whether people liked it or not. For me though, this book really worked. I think what left it at a 4 star instead of like a 4.5 or 5, the main thing was that the main character was wildly unlikable, which doesn't necessarily ruin a book for me. In fact, sometimes I really enjoy just very unlikable, horrible characters. However, I felt pretty beaten over the head by what an unlikable person. It was not veiled in any way. She was intentionally difficult and unlikable and like just hard to get along with everyone. And I felt kind of constantly reminded of that. So that sort of subdued my enjoyment from time to time while I was reading it. That being said, overall, I thought that this book was great. It was written well. The concept was interesting. So if that sounds like an interesting premise to you, then I absolutely recommend that you pick it up and give it a try. Last but not least, the book that I read in October that was my favorite book of everything I read, we have The Brief History of the Dead by Kevin Brockmeyer. This is what would you call this? There are some kind of fantastical qualities to this book, though I would say overall this is more of kind of literary fantasy, leaning more into sort of literary territory. This was very thematically rich and heavy. The idea of this book is based on, according to the author in like kind of a foreword, based on the idea of various African societies that believe that whenever you die, you don't, as long as people remember you, you are kind of still alive. And so it is set in a world where there's like this literal afterlife world where people who have died live in sort of a replica of the world that we live in, but they all know that they've died and they're still able to interact with one another and sort of lead these lives until everyone who is still alive forgets them. Once they are completely forgotten, then they vanish and go who knows where. Kind of a dark premise, but it really worked for me. I don't think this is for everyone. I need to be very clear on this. I've put a lot of thought into this book, and this is definitely, either this is really your kind of book or you will hate this. I think that there is not a whole lot of gray area in here because the ending is a very open ending. It's not a happy ending. And if you are a person who really prefers a more pleasant ending, that everything is wrapped up very neatly and everything is revealed and everything's understood and all that, this isn't the book for you. You will probably hate this. But I am someone who kind of a lot of times prefers a open ending to a wrapped up closed ending. So for me, this book worked. Not only that, but I am definitely going to look for more books by this author. I really loved the writing style. I love sort of the themes that it explored, the ideas that it explored. I liked the way the characters were developed. This book did a lot in a very short amount of time, and I really appreciated it. Like I said, though, this book isn't for everyone. If you want something, like this is a book that you can really chew on. And so I would go into it knowing that this is not a light read. Like I said, it's not nice and neat. It's not particularly happy, but it is well conceived. It is well constructed. The idea is just absolutely stellar. Even talking about this now, I think I'm probably going to raise this rating up to more like a 4.5. This was a great book. So I definitely would recommend this book absolutely to a very specific audience. All right, I think that that is going to be it. These are all of the books that I read in October, all these plus The Night Shift. I'd be very curious to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them, or if any of them just sound really interesting to you and you feel like you might pick them up. I would absolutely love to talk to you about it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.